The events of this story begin in Satan County. When the sun was setting near the window, stood the protagonist and looked into it. Also standing near her was the butler, who was addressed by the girl. She inquired of the man if there was no news from Eddie. The interlocutor evaded her and told the Countess that this was the case. It turns out that there had been no news from Mr. Eddie for the last period. The heroine sadly inquired where he had taken him in such a difficult time for them. It turns out that the Seventh Empire was on the brink of destruction. Last night, the Imperial Palace was attacked by unknown assailants. The last emperor of the Seven Hills, whose name was Hildar, was a tyrant. That was the reason why he was eliminated recently. Because of this, the nobles of the empire had to lock their doors, awaiting their punishment. Among them was the head of the Satan family, whose name was Roviel Satan. Right now, she was standing by the window, wondering where her brother Eddie had disappeared to. At the same time, a man burst into the room and addressed the Countess. He immediately stated that the soldiers who had attacked the palace were already here. That was why they were in ambush right now. The protagonist, upon hearing this, was not embarrassed in the slightest. It was all because she thought that now that the emperor was dead, those soldiers had decided to head here after the imperial palace. After all, she realized that she was the head of the family and had to protect her family at all costs. Next, the girl decided that she would go to meet those people. Immediately she did so, and the butler addressed the Countess as to where she was going after all. Also, everyone said that it was dangerous to go out now and asked her to come back. But in turn, the girl did not listen to them and continued on her way. After that, she immediately opened the front door, and what she saw in front of her amazed her. And all this because in front of her she saw her brother, whom she had not seen for a long time. He greeted his sister with a smile on his face, and also inquired afterwards whether he was late after all. The protagonist immediately asked Eddie what he was doing here. The guy remarked to her that he had prepared a gift that she would definitely like. Next, he decided to show his gift and sat down near the girl, showing the crown in his hands. The protagonist was shocked by this and wondered if he was the one who rebelled. A small amount of time after those events, the heroine was sitting on the throne with the crown. Her brother sat next to her and said now that the coronation ceremony had passed, then his little sister became a true empress. Suddenly, the girl declared for Eddie to listen to her now. The boy, in turn, inquired as to what it was that she wanted to tell him. The girl sadly remarked to him what he had arranged all this for. The brother told her with a smile that 2 years ago in the winter, his sister had said something to him. He remembered that she had said then that if she had been empress, she would have done much better. That was exactly why he had done all this. The girl was shocked at such a thing, and wondered if that was why he had decided to fulfill her words in reality. Further, the heroine thought that the blood has already been spilled, so she will have to clear up everything herself. After all, the head of the former emperor Bacalas no way to glue. After her thoughts, she asked her brother to call the scribes first. He was surprised to hear what she was going to do. The sister told him that the empress was obliged to do her work properly. She further inquired whether or not he wanted his sister to resemble the past headless emperor. The guy smiled and stated that she was his dear little sister, so he wasn't worried about her. Also noticed that beside this little sister, much more suits this role than that old man who was in front of her. And the protagonist at this moment remembered the words that if she was an empress, she would have done much better. She realized that she had said all this in jest, but it didn't make any difference now. Next, the girl turned to the butler and stated that this one had her brother tied to a chair. He in turn stated to Her Highness that this would be done. The brother of all turn was shocked at such a thing and wondered what the sister was doing. Just like that, the Seven Hills Empire gained a new ruler. The first empress of the Seven Hills was a girl named Roviel Satan. All this could be considered a step into the future, but everything was not so joyful. Immediately after the protagonist became empress, she began to work in her office. And so some amount of time had passed since those events. The girl sat at her desk, and next to her on the sofa lay her brother. Suddenly, the heroine hit the table and said that she had had enough. All this because she spent as much as 3 months to clean up the empire from the problems of the former ruler. Then she sadly said that she didn't have enough work to do besides that. Hearing this, her brother immediately asked if they hadn't removed the people she didn't need. It turns out that now the girl is just straining for nothing. The heroine stood up and said that there are only 4 dukes, which are in the north, southwest, and east. It also turns out that she doesn't favor them in any way. To all of this, there are not many people that the heroine could fully trust. The interlocutor remarked to her that there were 3 families that left because of the struggle for the throne. He is the one on top of the past tyrant and is always on guard. He also stated for the girl to tell him that he would not give them a chance to notice her in her little sister's place. The Empress sat down beside him and told Eddie that infighting is forbidden and wondered if he had forgotten that. It turns out this one is just a lot of work. The boy took a grape and said he understood and gave it to the girl. Again, he smiled and said that his sister was very talented, since she had made the head of the inspection team reconsider his views. He also remarked that she shouldn't worry, because she would definitely be able to handle all of this. Hearing this, the protagonist asked what other talent and where he saw some talent in her. She also noticed that if there really was one, this girl would have been married 3 times by now. She also inquired that besides that, how to get people when he wasn't scattered with so much work. And indeed, everyone was fumbling the girl because of the sheer amount of work she was loading them with. Also, she observed, isn't there a man who is smart, considerate, healthy, and will not write a resignation? She further dreamed of guys who would tell Her Highness that she could rely on him, or the man who would tell her that those papers the girl gave him were ready. Well, or at least tell Her Highness that there were some mistakes, but he had already fixed everything himself. Stinging pondered over all this, then remembered another way out. This way out for her was resignation, she thought. Why don't she find someone who is more knowledgeable about all this than her? That same us slapped the table with a huge effort and caught her brother's attention. He asked his little sister what had happened to her. The heroine immediately turned to her brother Eddie with a smile on her face. She stated that she was required to get married. When the sister said this to the guy, he immediately wondered if the one wanted to get married. He noticed that her age still allowed for marriage, but there would still be a suitable man for the role. Further, the guy cried out that her chosen one must be the strongest on the continent. The girl told him that she didn't want that for anything. After that, she told her brother to listen to her carefully. It was stated that she needs someone who can listen to her attentively, to be reliable, and most importantly useful at the same time. Next, roughly put something like the butler they have. Eddie immediately got up and ran to the door. At this, he stated that he understood everything, and he would find someone who would suit his busy little sister right away. The girl saw this and was surprised and wondered who he was going to look for. At the same time, she thought that she even felt somehow uncomfortable after all this. The heroine knew that she had an only brother, and his name was Eddie Satan. Their father had died when her brother was still very young. Then, when the girl was 14, followed him and their mother left, pulling the whole family on herself at that. And so, as a consequence of that, being children and you and your brother having to focus on maintaining the Satan family lineage. It just so happened that at that time the boy was just a baby, and the girl had no time before him. It was because of that that Eddie had to leave his father's house. He left him for as long as 6 years. The girl, in turn, passed away at the age of 27 years. And just like that, the departure of Eddie was her greatest regret in her past life. But right after this death, the girl once again got a chance to make things right that time when she was 14 years old. The first thing she did after her rebirth was to run to Edwin and hug him very tightly, doing this in gratitude for her sincerity. After that, her brother grew up to be a very savvy and healthy guy. Also, he should have reached that rank when people began to call him a swordsmanship genius. Suddenly, rumors began to spread about him that he is a notorious crazy man from Philand. Before the tournament started, the protagonist restrained her brother as best she could. She sat in her office and thought she had raised him, letting him do whatever he wanted. Her friend's subordinates turned to her, but the girl stated to Kyle that she was fine. Next, she consulted the list of participants and wondered if it was a complete list. The subordinate stated that it was, as all 178 people were gathered here. Hearing this, the heroine thought that she was already happy that so many candidates had gathered. Suddenly, she noticed that there was a person on the list with the name Dalton Pagos. She further noticed that it turns out that the Duchy of Pagos from the east has also decided to participate in this tournament. They claim that it is illegal to ascend the throne without the consent of the fourth Duke. Now the girl wondered if they might be up to something bad. The protagonist thought that all 4 duchies of their empire were involved in this battle. But in turn, she was uncomfortable recognizing herself as the empress. If the dukes join forces and gather an army, it would be very disadvantageous to her. After all, she still lacks a firm position yet. Then the girl told Kyle to tell her about the participants from these duchies. The guy in turn agreed and said that he would do everything to Her Majesty. The first candidate he named was a man named Dalton Pagos. It turns out that he is recognized as the strongest knight in the East. This guy is 23 years old and is the second son, but he is prophesied to become a duke. He is also known for his leadership, and he is a bit impatient. The girl listened to this and told the man to talk about the next candidate. The next subordinate called a man named Yafet Delmoy, who was from the south. This person was 26 years old and a brilliant guy who had demonstrated excellent swordsmanship in the Imperial Academy. The heroine stated that none of that was the case, and these candidates were not suitable. She asked if anyone had experience in running an estate, or if maybe one of the candidates excelled in economics or politics. It was also said that an even better option would be that they were skilled at resolving conflicts within the empire. The subordinate looked at his list and immediately stated that basically only those skilled with a sword were on there. The heroine wondered at the same time why such people would participate in such an event. The guy remarked to her that it was because they would have to deal with Sir Edwin. That was why he mostly chose candidates with excellent sword skills. The girl wondered with surprise at what the man had just told her. She wondered if her brother had decided to ruin her wedding plans. After all, she needed a skillful man, not a swordsman. Kyle, meanwhile, noticed that it wasn't a big part of it, because after all, there was still Duke de Hard from the north. Noticed that everyone thought that he would be the one to go to the finals and fight Sir Eddie. The girl wondered if it was really Duke de Hart. The protagonist knew that the Duke of Haven de Hart is and the Northern Duchy. It turns out that everyone is afraid of him, because he is a monster of the north. However, this is if a person the girl knows from a past life, and besides that, he is completely harmless. The girl thought, if he really was like that, then his dukedom would have completely different motives. Plus, she knew that if she married one duke, it would delay the plans of the other dukes from the continent for a while. The heroine realized that there was no way she would let Eddie ruin such a perfect candidate for her. Just then, the Empress rose and a subordinate asked if she wanted to go somewhere else. Before leaving, she smiled at him and said that she was going to tear someone's legs off. After a while, her brother was sitting in front of her. The girl shouted at him to raise his hands higher. He, in turn, asked if he was worse than the other candidates. He also asked if she wanted to see some weaklings next to her. At this very moment, the sister got very angry, but then calmed down a little. She said that she couldn't help it, because what was done was done. Then she pointed out to Eddie that, first of all, she had already said that she would decide who she would and would not get engaged to. It turns out that for a year, she will observe whether the candidate is suitable or not. That is why she does not allow the guy to get involved in the matter. He noted with a smile on his face that next to her there should not be a man weaker than him, but she should not worry, because he will deal with him if he runs away girl. The heroine could barely contain her emotions and stated that she still said before this. Also thought that she should still be on her guard. After a small amount of time, the room of the Empress, someone entered. This person inquired if His Majesty had called for him. That person was the commander of the Empire's Internal Affairs Inspection Team, whose name was Cecile Bright. The heroine stated with a smile that she had been to see her, and then asked how she was doing these days. The interlocutor immediately asked what she was talking about. She further remarked that she could not even remember when she had gone home last time. She then asked if there would be any orders today since she had called her or what. The Empress remarked to her that she knew she was very busy and apologized for disturbing her. However, she wondered if Cecile could look after Eddie these very days. The protagonist stated that she was just afraid to let things go. The commander remarked that she understood on everything. Further stated that she had tried to introduce one of the knights to Sir Edwin, but it had all ended unsuccessfully. She then turned to Her Majesty and asked if the girl was sure that their relationship with Sir Edwin was the same as before. The heroine remarked to her what she was saying. After all, the girl thinks to find a sibling as close as theirs in their empire would be quite difficult. The captain noticed that Edwin had secretly crossed the border last month. As a consequence, it appeared that he had brought with him the elixir of Manglada. This elixir, known as the special medicine of the Kingdom of Grime. All of this means there was a possibility that he mixed it with the Empress's food. Also, Cecile noticed that no matter what the dose of the potion was small or not, but it was unknown for what purpose he decided to do so besides secretly from his sister. The main character, listening to all this, only laughed at the end. She immediately said that first of all, it is someone who in this case she has nothing to worry about. All of this is because this is Edwin's longtime hobby, along with running away. Noticing that after their parents left this world, then he became obsessed with his sister's health. He was 16 when he ran away and ended up bringing her some medicine from the south and asking her to eat it. The girl was furious at the time, so she told him not to bring it. That's probably why he changed his method of slipping in his Empress in his food. Also, the heroine noticed that he is that kind of person, and the woman should not worry about it. After all, he is the reason why the heroine is healthy. The captain remarked that if Her Majesty says so, then she has understood everything. She went on to say that as far as Sir Edwin is concerned, she will do her best, but not to expect too much from her. Also remarked regarding the matter of the 4 dukes. She will send a report as soon as she gets new information about them. The protagonist agreed to this, and the interlocutor left her room. After a small amount of time, the girl fell down without strength. At the same time, she thought that it was better this way than it was with that medicine. As soon as possible, the girl thought, she must find a husband to whom she could shift some of her responsibilities. Otherwise, she would die of overwork already in this life after all. After some time, the tournament was still at the starting stage. The Empress was just about to appear in public where her brother was waiting for her. The moment she arrived, the candidates lined up in front of her, standing on one knee in front of her. The protagonist crouched on the throne and looked closely at all the candidates. After a few moments, she announced to the men to rise. The first ones the Empress saw were the heirs from the Pagos and Delma family. The next one she saw was the man they call the Beast from the north. That man's name was Haven Dehard, and the girl from her past life knew him. After a small amount of time, the Empress declared that from this moment, the tournament was declared open, and the whole event began. While doing so, the girl thought of Haven Dehard. She remembered meeting him for the first time when the winter was harsher than ever on her way home. It had all happened 14 years ago, and she had been a little girl with the responsibilities of head of the household on her fragile shoulders. Back then, everyone had mocked her, ignored her, and tried to set her up all the time. When long ago she had been cheated, and there were even times when she had to sell her belongings. Everyone had turned their backs on her, so her last hopes remained a trip up north. The heroine looked to see that he had the same rough facial features that he had back then. It was then that a young man of her years from the far north, Haven Dehard, reached out to her. At this very time, the girl sat and thought that now that she thought about it, she realized that the decision to go to the north was the right one. At that, the girl wondered, was that guy baying at her because she was trembling in front of him? Or was there some other reason? She also wondered what else his nickname was the Monster of the North. After all, he had always been Satan's benefactor. Suddenly, her brother turned to her and announced that it was starting. It was now the turn of the dueling Lord of the South, Sir Japhet Delmoy. They immediately crossed their swords, and the Empress inquired of her brother whether Delmoy would win. He, in turn, inquired if she couldn't see for herself. Also asked whether the sister's eyes are for beauty. The protagonist noticed that it had been a long time since she had packed his lunches and watched him practice fencing. A small amount after the fight, Duke Delmoy was declared the winner. The protagonist was overjoyed and stated to Guy to watch, because it turns out she was right. Guy immediately stated that all this is not surprising, because she is his sister, and the next exit will be Sir Pagosa. The girl wondered if it was true. She also asked when the finale would be already. Her brother remarked to her that it would probably be in a week. The heroine immediately thought that there should be a meeting soon, but because of this, everything can be delayed. At the same time, she wondered if he was thinking about it, because it's only 1 week. But she also thought in her heart that any candidate would be good enough for her, so she should find her an employee. While they were talking about it, Sir Pagos was fighting. He had already literally defeated his opponent and pointed his sword at him. On further, he swung it to achieve his opponent and take his life. At the same time, with a smile on his face, he declared that he should finally die. Hearing all this, the protagonist sadly exhaled and further turned to her brother. He even, without even asking what the girl wanted from him, immediately rushed to the place of battle. All this was because he realized that death was unacceptable in this tournament they were having. That was why, at the very last moment, he managed to repel the sword of the man's attacker. This man's opponent was very frightened because he thought that he had already come to an end. But still, the brother of the protagonist managed to save this man. Now he stood with the ball pointed at his opponent, who was unarmed from his attack. Sir Pagos next remarked his objection to all this. He turned to the Empress and stated how they would manage to desecrate a sacred tradition. After all, Sir Satan has no right to interfere in a fight during a tournament. The protagonist inquired about the sacred tradition in question. It also doubled that if he called it sacred, he would incur the wrath of God. After all, anyone who dares to kill his rival would be considered a criminal at that. But the guy, in turn, remarked to the heroine that they set new rules already during the conduct, and it is not fair at all. The Empress noticed to him that the essence of this tournament is the election of her future spouse. So inquired then, what was the problem if she herself would set the rules while doing so? After that, she decided that she would leave this event. At the same time, stated that she did not think this duel was worth her attention. She then turned to Eddie and stated that he was now in charge of the tournament. Her brother heard all of this and stated that he would. The main character thought that she got rid of such garbage. It turned out to be the opposite. On this very day after the tournament began, she had a meeting. But she had no idea that after ascending the throne, she would have to face a fairy shit. The North, along with the Seven Hills, are holding back the Grypton Empire. Next to them is the Zilton Empire and the friendly country of the Seven Hills. However, a trade disagreement has arisen between Zilton and the Empire. And the reason for this is the difference between the gold coins of the Seven Hills cast from 12 grams of gold, and also the gold coins of Zilton cast from 14 grams of gold. It turns out the amount of money that the Emperor's aunt pocketed for herself amounted to 320,000 gold coins. Zilton, who tolerates the friendship with the Seven Hills, formally protested. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which was on the verge of bankruptcy, stated that it had no way to compensate the Zilton Empire's demands. The Empress was reported to the Empress by one of the officials in the whole thing. After a small amount of time, the heroine declared for the man to shut his mouth. The man asked Her Majesty what she had just told him. The heroine stated to him that you don't worry about it and just follow the soldiers, because nothing else is required of him. The man stated that it was all bad, because the Empress stated that she was going to rip his stomach open. The girl inquired whether he had bad hearing. It turns out that he understands everything perfectly well, so he declared to his subordinates that on the air they cut him in half. The interlocutor immediately fell on his knees and began to beg Her Majesty to pardon him, for he regretted it. Another man turned to Her Majesty and remarked that this was too harsh a punishment for someone who had worked hard for the Empire for so many years. The Empress immediately called out what other punishment was too harsh, noticing that she was ashamed to see the result of 12 years of incompetence from this person. That's why she was curious about even what the big deal was about the belly section. When something happens, they can't find a solution. Asked if they are capable of taking responsibility, of solving the problem with dignity. She also stated why on earth the taxes of the Empire should cover their mistakes. Again, she turned to her interlocutor and stated that if he told her the truth, she would not cut his stomach. She further asked if the man didn't really know that Marcus and his aunt were wasting that money. It all came to a head a few days later, when the former foreign minister was beheaded for taking bribes. The chase for the wealth of the former emperor's family came to an end. The heroine, having formed an emergency fund, repaid the damage to the Zilton Empire. The emergency fund is a personal budget designed to provide financial security in case of unforeseen expenses. And just as the tournament was reaching its final round, the protagonist was approached by her brother. He, running up to the girl, said that their looks quite tired. He also noticed that he was told that today she hardly touched her soup and whether it was true. The main character stated that she was just a little tired. Also asked if there was something in the soup again. Put something in the soup tasted, of course, some strange. The interlocutor remarked to her sister that it was better for her not to know all this. The girl with a sad face said that she would lose his sister once again needs not a cure, but an intelligent spouse. The guy remarked to her that if that was all it was, she shouldn't worry. After all, Duke DeHard is likely to win after all. The Empress wondered what he was talking about. She wondered how he knew that since the tournament wasn't even over yet. Her brother told her that the Duke was the strongest in the north and wondered if that was true. After a small amount of time, the heroine arrived at the final of the tournament. Haven DeHart was fighting there. The protagonist sat and was very worried about him and also remembered all that he had done for her in her past life. His opponent, however, turned out to be the very man who wanted to kill his other opponent. And so their fierce battle did begin, and they crossed their swords with each other. The Empress and the rest of the audience watched this exciting fight very closely. The Duke of DeHard dominated his opponent the entire time. After just a small amount of time, the favorite of the protagonist struck his sword against the sword of his opponent and destroyed it. This is why he was the winner in this duel. All this because his opponent no longer had the opportunity to fight because his weapon was destroyed. A moment later, Haven DeHard was declared the winner of the tournament. Seeing all this, the protagonist got very excited. All this was because this was the man she wanted to see as her spouse. After a small amount of time, the man arrived to the Empress and kneeling on his knees stated that his name was Haven DeHard from the Northern Lands. He also added that he was dedicating this victory to Her Majesty. The protagonist gave him her hand and stated that she gladly accepted it. The man, in turn, kissed the girl's hand, which he held with his own hand. The heroine saw this thought that at last it had all happened. She looked at the man who kissed her hand and thought that she finally had an employee, a permanent one, who would stay with her until the grave. After a while, the main character was again approached by this man. The girl inquired about what Duke DeHart wanted. Also with a smile on her face noticed him that once again congratulates him on his victory at the tournament. The interlocutor in turn apologized for beating so news, but he has a question for Her Majesty. It turns out that there is one thing he would like to know from her. The protagonist immediately inquired what he wanted to know. He inquired about her younger brother, Earl of Satan. Is he really crazy? The girl was shocked at such a thing and simply petrified, then came to her senses a little and inquired what Eddie had done to him after all. The man said that, in general terms, if he had not taken part in the tournament, her brother would have gone straight to the Grypton Empire and made a mess there. So it turns out that if he killed one of the two commanders, then a war would start then. Hearing all this, the Empress was very shocked from her brother. The girl realized that if the Griptog Empire launched an invasion, the first to be hit would be the Northern Duchy of DeHarda, because they are located very close to each other's border. Now the girl knew that Eddie had threatened the Duke to take part in the tournament. It turns out DeHard is a good man, but unfortunately he was forced to come to her. The Empress said that if her brother threatened a man and forced him to participate in the war, then he has the right to refuse. It turns out he could return if all this was not to his liking. But suddenly the man stated to Her Majesty that on second thought, it seemed like a good idea to hit them now. The heroine was shocked to hear such words from her interlocutor. She immediately wondered what on earth he was saying and what else to hit. The Duke further remarked that it would actually be a war with the Empire and wondered if he was right. He also said that if he became the winner of the tournament, then Her Majesty would not just sit idly by. After all, his hometown was in danger, and the girl thought that it smells like the deeds of a crazy brother of hers. He also said that it all seems to be so, but it is worth considering not only him. Immediately afterward, the man took her hand and put it to his heart. He further inquired why it was so. Then he leaned closer to the girl and declared that he already belonged to her. The protagonist was shocked at this turn of events and declared that it was all wrong. After a moment, she removed her hand and noticed that she had to make a decision about who the winner would be on her own. That is why this man is not the only contender to win. The Duke remarked, "It turns out that she is still undecided." The girl, in turn, added that all this is exactly so. After all, it turns out she plans to consider all the candidates during the coming year. The man noticed that she had a whole year. Renya went on to say that if that didn't suit the man, he could return to his place in the north immediately. Next, the man asked Her Majesty if she didn't like him. The girl thought that she was certainly a valuable person, but it was not that simple. At the same time, she told him that it was not a question of whether she liked him or not. He stated that he understood all this, however, he liked the girl a lot. At the same time, the heroine was embarrassed by such a thing. At the same time, she thought, if this man will show himself well during this year, but so be it. We will write down his potential suitors. But still thought it was better that he didn't know about all this. Next, she walked closer to the man and touched his chin with her hand. While doing so, she said with a smile that she hoped he didn't hear each other and yet also understood. The man leaned closer to the Empress's hand and stated that he would not let her down for anything. After a small amount of time, the girl was sitting in her office. Once again, she was busy with a huge amount of work. She was also thinking that since the tournament was over, she might as well load everyone up with their new jobs already. Suddenly, there was a knock on her office, and the heroine announced for those to come in. It was the butler, and he announced to Her Majesty that there were those who requested her audience. The heroine immediately inquired who these people were. The interlocutor stated that these people were Pagos Dalton from the east and Jaffe Delmoy from the south. Both men were already sitting on their knees before the Empress. They immediately stated that they had come with a message from the southeast for Her Majesty. The girl immediately wondered what she had suspected could happen. About Taki, it was strange that the two duchies had united, and she wondered what it was all about. One of the boys had stated to Her Majesty that he was Pagos Dalton. It turns out he wants to be chosen as a finalist for the national tournament. Also remarked that if she chooses him as the winner, the East and South Duchy will remain loyal to the Satan family as well. Upon hearing this, the protagonist stated that she didn't like it at all. She also added that she didn't accept such a thing. Besides, didn't they lose to Duke de Hart during the competition, she wondered. The interlocutor wondered if Her Majesty realized what she was just saying, or whether she did not realize what their proposal meant. The girl, in turn, thought that by sending such a child as a messenger, these people must think themselves superior. After some thought, the heroine told Pagos Dalton that he, not she, did not realize what she was talking about. She also wondered if he would only swear allegiance to her if she were married. Noted that if that is the case, does it mean that if she doesn't marry him, he will be against her? Also added that in that case, she would be forced to cut off their heads and recognize them as traitors in doing so. The interlocutor remarked that Her Majesty was mistaken. After all, both of their families had not conspired to betray her. However, as the founders of the Seven Hills, they would like to offer her the power to strengthen her position in the current situation. The man requested that the Empress make the Southeast her stronghold, when they accept the honor of becoming her right hand, Her Majesty. Listen, the words of this gorge, the protagonist, thought he was really good at persuasion. Next, the protagonist turned to Pagos Dalton again. She stated that this one conveyed to his father that let his will be more sincere. Besides, she added that it would yet be known to them the Duke's second son was not her type. These words were heard by both boys and were shocked by them. Then she turned to the other man and said that she asked him to stay a little longer because she would like to clarify something with him. The other man left that room, and only the man whom the Empress had called out remained. At this moment, the girl turned to Sir Jafet Delmoy. She inquired if Tu would get the Southern Duchy when she married Pagos. Also remarked that the man could think as much as he liked at that. The interlocutor immediately asked Her Majesty if it wasn't enough that he was her loyal subject. The protagonist immediately smiled and said that she thought they were going to ask her to choose one of them. But since they came together, that wasn't the case at all. She also noticed that this person used to be such a candidate, but now turned out to be just a bridesmaid. And she wondered if this was all just to rejoice in Pagos's accomplishments he had come. The interlocutor listened attentively, and he was not particularly pleased with these words. Then he dodged the girl and said that Her Majesty's will would be passed on to his own father. Sent these men back to the south and east. The rest of the day, the protagonist was engaged in paperwork. After a while, a very interesting time came. The Empress had just changed into her fancy dress and was being admired by her brother. At the same time, he said that his sister was very beautiful in it. It was time for the banquet to begin, at which the final winner of the national tournament would be announced. After all the preparations, at last everything was ready to begin. After a while, the Empress arrived, and it was announced that Her Majesty the Empress had finally arrived. But she did not arrive alone, but surrounded by her brother and the winner of the recent tournament. After a small amount of time, Duke de Hart addressed Her Majesty. He extended his hand to her and asked if the girl would do him the honor. It was he who inquired, for he wished to dance with her. All the same, the Empress agreed, and so they began to twirl together in a dance. The heroine scrutinized him carefully, while thinking that she wondered whether he thought she was a beautiful girl. Then the girl turned to Haven. Quietly in his ear, she whispered to him to come and see her in the morning in her private office. Hearing this, the man asked if people didn't usually tell him to come to her room tonight. The heroine immediately told him not to talk nonsense. He, in turn, realized that he had misunderstood the woman and stated that he knew it. After a while, the man did fulfill the will of the Empress. He arrived at her, and the girl declared that she was graciously requesting Mr. Haven. She also introduced her first secretary, whose name was Kyle. To the secretary, she stated that this was her future consort, Duke de Hart. Both boys threw expressive glances at each other. The Duke thought that this best secretary is near Her Majesty all the time. Kyle, in turn, thought that they would be seeing more of this man from now on. Next, the protagonist turned to her future spouse and said that you did not scare him because she would not repeat twice. The interlocutor remarked to her that he would take this into account. After a while, the Empress said that first of all it was necessary to look at these documents. She asked if the guy would have approved or rejected them if he were in her place. The interlocutor, in turn, began to look closely and read them. Having familiarized himself with them, he put the papers on the table and said that he would have rejected them for 3 reasons. The heroine was surprised and immediately claimed the guy to give her all sorts of reasons. He stated that, first of all, it was not even worth considering. These get this tax that is under consideration will either be eliminated or reduced because of the increasing incidence of citizen dissatisfaction. That is why, in his opinion, this tax should still be reduced. Secondly, the man noted that although it looks within reason, but in fact it is a complete nonsense. It's because not so long ago Yale Land was established, so a lot of families migrated there. Well, and somehow, miraculously, there are still hungry people there. The man stated that it would be good to find out what is going on there, and either someone's deception or something more global. The Empress inquired then what the third reason was, and the future consort remarked that for starters, the development of mineral mines in the Delmoy Mountains should be abandoned. It is also necessary to find out the relationship of the 2 interested territories that want to make a border out of these mountains. After all, if it turns out that they do not have time, you all could end up in a battle for territory. The protagonist listened carefully to all the words of the man and thought that this is exactly the man she was looking for. After all 3 of the problems named are what she had been overlooking. Also, even the solutions Haven had outlined were the same as hers. After that, came up with the idea that now, whatever this flighty man said, it doesn't matter. Next, she turned to the man and asked if he would like to have a cup of tea with her, and after a short time, they were already sitting together for a cup of tea. The protagonist said that she thought the engagement could be organized next week. The man surprised her by saying that literally at yesterday's banquet, the girl had hinted to him that it was not worth hurrying. The heroine remarked that she had reconsidered her views and wondered if this was not to his liking. The Duke remarked to her that in no way was it. He also stated that he would agree to have a milk with her literally even tomorrow. At that, he looked at the girl closely and stated that she looked pleased at that. And the latter remarked to him that it was a natural thing. At the same time, she said how could she be dissatisfied when the only and useful man would help her? He, in turn, inquired what the only one meant. The Empress immediately told him that she was thinking that after marriage she should have a lover of some kind. The Duke was quite angry and shocked. Immediately, he rose to his feet and shouted that he did not intend to see how she shares her love with someone else. The protagonist immediately told him that she thought the man had it all wrong. She stated that it was important to her to have as many people on her side as possible. Upon hearing this, Haven stated that if the girl chose to marry someone else, there would be carnage. The protagonist was shocked at this behavior and stated that she was talking about adding someone to her harem. Again, the man turned to Her Majesty. He kissed the girl's hand and then stated that he would protect her. He also remarked that if the four families overstepped their bounds, he promised her that he would bring all of their heads. If Gripton encroached on their borders, he would immediately send his troops there and would not allow any threat to disturb the Empress. The future spouse further stated that he would definitely protect Her Majesty. The protagonist was a little embarrassed and wondered what he was saying. She asked if he was enough to say that he wanted to unite the whole continent together. The interlocutor noted that if Her Majesty wishes, he will immediately fulfill her will. But the girl, in turn, stopped him and told him to calm down and not to fool around like her brother Eddie. She also stated that this was an order for him. The man left already stated that he would do her bidding. The heroine at this point thought that if these two together with her brother, the effect would be doubled several times. After that, the girl placed her hand on the man's arm. She also noticed that if he promised her something, she might reconsider her decision about creating a harem. She stated that you, the one, promised her that he will always be on her side and will always support her. Also, that he would be by her side until death parted the two of them. The man did not hesitate for a second and immediately stated that he swore on his life that he would fulfill it. Hearing this, the girl was very happy and thought that finally she would have an accomplice. After a while, the future spouse still left her, and the heroine sat alone and drank tea with a cake. At the same time, she thought that choosing Haven was a great decision for her, because she had not felt so good for a long time. After that, she kept catching a course to eat the cake. At that, she thought that if he really had such a talent, the girl should organize an engagement as soon as possible. She will also make him sign a lifetime contract with her. At this very moment, the heroine tasted a piece of cake that was in front of her and was further numbed by its taste. At the same time, she realized that it was most likely her brother Eddie who had created it. Even aside from the fact that he had spiked something again, but also, yes, overly bitter tasting. Also, she thought as soon as she saw him and told him everything, even if it was to my liking. At that very moment, her door, someone vacant and walked right in. It was the wine maid, announced Her Majesty that the commander of the knights had arrived. The girl remarked that if it was Cecile, let her in. The subordinate immediately entered her room. The girl inquired from her if there was any news. The Oathbreaker immediately apologized for the disturbance and said that, however, she had urgent news for the Empress. The protagonist inquired with surprise as to what had happened after all. The captain of the knights stated that just recently there had been a mass kidnapping in Philand. She also stated that just recently she was informed that 7 people from nearby cities in the Empire had been kidnapped. The missing are celebrities from all walks of life. The girl asked who exactly was kidnapped. Her interlocutor told her that a professor of law from the academy had been kidnapped, as well as the 3rd daughter of Count Gideon. Also among the kidnapped was a famous architect, as well as 75-year-old historian Timolus, as well as several other people. Suddenly, the protagonist stopped her and stated that the captain had already informed her enough of this. That was all and clear, but she wondered what the motive for all of this was. Cecile stated that she would tell her everything now. Immediately, she noted that they had a witness statement who had seen the abduction of the 4th victim. She then reported that a guy who looked like her brother had tried to grab one of the men and was yelling that Her Majesty wanted to see him. The captain stated that was how he said it. The protagonist sat shocked at this turn of events. At that, she immediately thought about what her brother Eddie was doing after all. Further, the captain noted to her that the kidnapped are now in Satan County. It also turns out that they are fine, and they will be releasing them soon. But then stated that she could not find words, and said that it was all about rumors to Her Majesty. The heroine inquired what kind of rumors they were talking about. Her interlocutor told her that the rumors were about her going to create her harem. The heroine wondered if a harem was what they were talking about. Also, she understood that Haven had said that she would not tolerate such a thing. Then she did not understand where the rumors came from. Also, furthermore, there was something else she was curious about. She then asked the captain where her brother Edwin was. She told her that he was at the Palace Stadium. And so, immediately after this conversation about the protagonist, and went to that very place. There stood her brother, who was practicing in the possession of a sword. When he noticed his sister, he immediately rejoiced and ran up to her. At the same time, running up inquired whether she had come to see him. The heroine immediately asked him if he did not want to tell her anything. The guy made a surprised look and asked what she was talking about and why she was so angry now. His sister told him that she had found out that he had kidnapped people and locked them in their mansion. The brother stated with a smile that he had not kidnapped anyone. He further remarked that he had only offered them to work for the royal family. The girl thought that he had done it after all, kidnapped them. Further, with a sad face, she stated to her brother that dragging people somewhere without their consent was kidnapping after all. She also noticed that not letting them go home was also illegal imprisonment. But in turn, her brother remarked to her that then they would be loyal to her until the end of time. And if they wanted to betray, they would pay with their lives. He also asked how else to subdue dangerous people who could stab them in the back. The heroine couldn't find any answer to that anymore. Next, she walked up to the guy and tapped his forehead with her hand. After that, she declared to take from finally already woke up. After a moment, the heroine still put her hand on the guy's head and stroked him. Also noticed how many times she had asked him not to do something so stupid. After she asked that he set a meeting for them and apologize properly, and also asked if he understood all this. The brother, after such a sweet act from his sister, stated that one should ask first and then ask to go with him, and asked if he understood that way. His sister remarked to him that you can say so, but just don't kidnap anyone in the process. The protagonist apologized to her brother after that, but the one stated that everything was fine. Also, the girl thought that in any case, she plans to hire a lot more secretaries and civil servants. After all, it is still necessary to reorganize the system to maintain stability. Further stated to her brother that then she should go and see how normal people do it. She asked him if he wanted to do that, and he said that of course he did. Immediately afterward, the heroine went to another location on the estate. At the same time, thought that she wondered from the people Eddie had brought whether there were those who wanted to really work for her. After all, if she did not follow Haven's will, there would be massacres with his talent, and the girl did not understand what else to do. And so while she was walking down the corridor and thinking about all this, she saw Haven in front of her, which came out from around the corner. Immediately, she wondered if the man was heading towards her. She further remarked that regardless of how the man felt about the matter, she had something to say. But the man's friend interrupted her and immediately addressed Her Majesty. He stated that means she likes the jealous type of guy. The protagonist was shocked and wondered what went through this man's head again. After that, they went and sat down on the couch together to discuss things. The protagonist noticed that it was just a misunderstanding between them. After all, now she has no intention of creating grief, and it's just a ridiculous rumor. The interlocutor asked whether he definitely should not worry about it. The heroine remarked that naturally it is so, because he is the only person she has. He, embarrassed, stated that he had too. After all, Her Majesty is the only girl he has. The heroine at that moment thought that it was all just fine. As a consequence, she took her hand and touched the man's face with it. The man became even more embarrassed and asked what Her Majesty was doing. The girl looked carefully at his face and thought how alluring his gaze was. Haven, in his turn, little by little leaned towards the girl in order to kiss her. After a few moments, their lips touched in a kiss. The protagonist calmly accepted it and did not even push the man away. Immediately after this action, she sat a little shocked. Her future spouse was even more embarrassed and immediately apologized for his dry lips. Because of all this, he began to feel very bad and wondered if he had been overly hasty at this point. The girl, for her part, continued to sit there embarrassed as well. At the same time, she thought that this kiss was probably appropriate, because they were already engaged in any case. The protagonist knew that engagement is the first step to marriage. As a consequence, it is customary for married people to share one bed for two. Also, among other things, the heroine had already promised Haven that there would be no harem. Then the girl thought, what if he becomes the only man she will kiss for the rest of her life? At that, the man who sat across from her looked at the pensive girl. He wondered if he had spoiled her mood with his action. But literally at the same time, the protagonist thought it was that even if she kissed him, only and she would only be for it. At that very moment, she leaned towards Haven, and it seemed like she was about to kiss him again. No sooner had he done so than suddenly someone knocked on the room they were in and addressed Her Majesty. The heroine immediately moved away from the guy and stated that they were entering the room. At that very moment, a butler entered the room. The Empress inquired what was the matter. The butler immediately apologized for distracting the girl and stated that he quickly brought her up to speed. The beauty's future spouse sat turned away from them and was even more confused. Suddenly, the butler announced that an alert had arrived from Delmoy's house with a marriage proposal. The protagonist and the man that sat beside her were shocked at this. Next, the Duke rose and stated to Her Majesty that he was requesting that the commander of the knights be summoned. All this since the lands of Delmoy would be wiped out. The heroine immediately remarked to him that she had told him that Eddie had been bypassed. The interlocutor remarked to her that it means that war with Delma is just not going to happen. The protagonist remarked to him that his request would be denied. The Duke, in turn, told her that he apologized to Her Majesty, but with all due respect to her, he has the right as Duke of Dehard. The heroine, in turn, thought that once again he was speaking for his own. She also wondered why he only wanted to give her extra work. The Empress immediately told the man that if he wanted to start a war with them, he could forget about the girl. The man asked her what she wanted to say. She continued that she had long ago said that she had only one man. The Duke asked if the girl could refuse the offer. All this because he has everything he needs to exterminate Delmoy. The protagonist at this very time thought that, in all likelihood, so reflected their moment with provocation. After all, it turns out after the rejection they received, when they returned to their place and she received reports from Cecile about the advance in the southwest. She understood, since she and Haven had not yet married, uniting the North and Phyland, then apparently those people thought that now was a good time for their actions. Also, the girl was completely sure that Skyer would not get into the fray. Because of that, only the option of joining forces with Delma and Pagos remained. It turns out that this option will definitely lead to a civil war. In the current situation, the two sides will be on opposite sides of the barricade. And if that's the case, it's not bad news. But she also realized that if Delmoy himself decided to offer her hand and heart, then this chance should definitely not be missed. Immediately, the heroine turned to Haven and told him not to be alarmed. After all, she already has the bait for them. The interlocutor immediately noticed that, in truth, he was still wondering what such moments were going on in her head. With a smile on her face, the girl inquired if he thought it best to take out the Pagos. He in turn stated to Her Majesty that she was far more interesting than he could have suspected. The man also looked closely at his companion, and it seemed to him that she froze. Immediately after that, he took off his jacket and put it on the girl's shoulders. At this, he was very much embarrassed, and hesitating, stated that he thought she might be cold. All this was because her hands were quite cold. He also noticed, all of a sudden, she was somehow uncomfortable while doing so. The confused protagonist noticed that the coldness protrudes when a man takes care of her. She further added that she will be fine, so that one can already go. The future spouse evaded her and said that he would look forward to meeting her. After all this, the girl called Count Delmoy to her. In a little while he arrived at her place, and she was seated on her throne. Immediately, Lydia inquired if they were not bridesmaids, saying that they would rejoice for their neighbors. And the Earl immediately remarked to her, however joyous the motive, he did not think the girl would rejoice in it either, whether it was a member of the family or whether he thought wrongly, he asked. The heroine, on hearing this, smiled. She also asked if he thought that by becoming her spouse, he would be able to get more privileges than he had at the moment. The interlocutor remarked to her what she was saying. After all, it was only his admiration for the Empress that awakened him to make such a proposal. Hearing this, the girl thought that he was such a hypocrite. She further inquired as to what she should do in such a situation. After all, Duke Dehard is very jealous, and his feelings she treasures very much. So also to all this has succeeded, only the news will reach very quickly. Now she wondered if he thought Pagos would like it. Because of that, she wondered if the guy was not afraid of the consequences. He had not expected such a question and was shocked. Then he smiled and said that if there are appropriate consequences, Delmoy is not related to Pagos. Hearing such words, the protagonist was overjoyed and came up with her plan further. Afterward, she stated to her interlocutor that this was indeed the case. After all, it turns out that for about 10 years, Delmoy has already been tolerating. She further stated that enough time had passed since the invasion of Missus, and with the help they had received from the Duchy of Pagos. It turns out that the Empress's observation of the behavior of the lands of Pagos was still ongoing. The protagonist knew that the 4 duchies of the Seven Hills were tasked with guarding the empire, as their military might gives them an advantage even without support from the empire itself. But the borders of Delmoy's lands in the south of the empire were destroyed due to the machinations of Missus. In a difficult time for the south, the east and Duke Pagos came to the rescue. By helping to help with the severe crisis, changed the attitude of the 2 duchies. But in the end, good things are quickly forgotten, and the south regretted to restore his honor and position. And here, just in the interlocutor of the protagonist, stated that Pagos is an uneven Delma. The girl wondered what he was saying. But still, if she recalled, just recently, deposits of high-quality ore had been discovered on Viscount Hildal's lands, and she wondered if that was true. However, she further went on to say that this area happened to be near eastern Alcus. The interlocutor, listening to all this, could not find words and no answers. So it turns out that this very source of ore was at the border of Mount Delpin. The aristocracy of the East and South had disputed over who should rightfully own the mine. Consequently, Tildel sought help from Delmoy and Alquis from Pagos. But the result of all this was the same, and the South owed the East. At this very time, some document was brought to the Empress. She took it and told her interlocutor that 10 years had already passed and the situation had not changed. It turns out that now, neither the North nor Philand will tolerate Delma's humiliation. In the end, if Pagos decides to settle this incident, the Empire will intervene for the cause of world peace. The disgruntled cries of discontent from the aristocracy of the South, reaching unspeakable limits, is not even worth mentioning. Now the protagonist thought that if in this way it will be possible to take control, Delmoy subdued the ardor of the Pagos, she will be very pleased with it. The interlocutor, in his turn, declared to her that, as on the last occasion, he would quote her words. Immediately afterward, he dodged, "Hey," and went away, leaving that room. The heroine, for her part, thought that she had done her best, and now the choice would be Delma's alone. With that, she rose from her throne and felt something wrong with her body. A picture began to wash over her eyes, and her body stopped moving and obeying her. All this was noticed by her subordinates. Her turned to Her Majesty, asking what was wrong with her. They were very shocked from such a state of her, and wondered if she was bad and needed to call a doctor sooner. Before the eyes of the protagonist, everything began to swim, and soon she lost consciousness from everything. It turns out that her first life, the girl stayed in absolute loneliness. However, she tried not to take it to heart until one moment she heard something. And she heard that they called her an ice queen, at the fault of which suffers a small child. That is, her brother. Then the girl had no idea how she came back to life, but she decided for herself that in this life everything will be different. It turns out that her brother is with her, who laughs even when she did not say anything funny, and also a caring spouse who helps her with everything. Even though Eddie continues his hobby of slipping potions into her food, she'd rather eat it and live as long as she can. That's why she ate that piece of cake back then, which felt weird. A small amount of time passed after that incident, and the protagonist did wake up. The first thing she heard after she woke up was her brother saying that he was forbidding his little sister and wouldn't let her die. He was also sitting in front of her and begging her to open her eyes. The girl saw that very moment he was very sad, and the guy kept telling her not to repeat her past mistakes. Suddenly, she put her hand on her brother's head and turned to Eddie. He immediately got excited and asked if her sister had finally come to her senses. He also stated that she just can't die like that. The heroine with the announcement wondered what he was talking about and why this Anae should die. She also noticed that her future spouse Haven was standing in front of her as well. It turns out, she wondered how she had been in this bed for so long after all. The Duke remarked to Her Majesty that she had been lying there for about an hour. She inquired what the doctor ended up saying about her. The fellow stated that he said the girl must have been poisoned by something. The heroine wondered if she had indeed poisoned herself. Suddenly, the doctor entered the room and asked Her Majesty how she was feeling. He also asked her if she had any stomach pain. For if there was even a slight pain, he requested that the girl let him know about it. The Empress remarked to him that she had nausea and also chills. The doctor inquired about all these symptoms. She also noticed that it was still a little hard for her to breathe and inquired if the man would like to know what the poison was. He stated that although the symptomatology was subtle, the disturbance in her internal organs and the lowering of her body temperature indicated the effects of the Juriel poison. The girl wondered what kind of poison Juriel was. In turn, her future spouse inquired if there was an antidote against it. The doctor noticed that there was none. The man immediately ran up to him and grabbed him by his clothes. At the same time, he very aggressively inquired what the man was saying about it not being there. And yet, if it is, then yes, let him take his legs in his hands and run to create it. But his interlocutor immediately stated that this is not the case, because there is simply no need for him. He also added that Her Majesty should be fine without him. Immediately, he was asked to elaborate on all this. He remarked that he himself was not aware of it, but that Her Majesty's body itself resists the effects of the poison. Still, Juriel is very dangerous. Diluted antidote has not yet been created. The Duke inquired with surprise how it was that her body resists on its own. The girl at this point said that in vain did not worry, because it turns out not so easy to kill her. The doctor noted that all this is not true, because the poison is quite strong. After ingestion, it can kill a poor person in a couple of hours. Literally at the same time, her brother stated about the protective hepaton. He also added that he has been giving this drug to his sister for 3 years, stated that this medication helps to keep the immune system normal by resisting toxins. And so, he wondered if this was possibly the reason why it happened the way it did. The main character was shocked by such words and asked Eddie what he had been feeding her all this time. The doctor in turn stated that then it was good, and he would go to create drugs based on hepaton. After that, the girl said that it was lucky that the poison did not have a proper effect on the body, but the cake was indeed very bitter. Her brother asked with surprise what other cake was. He also remarked that he had asked the servants not to add anything to that particular cake. He further reflected and stated that it turns out the cake was bitter. The sister remarked to her brother Eddie that she could only tell him one thing, though she was against her spiking it, and for today indeed it saved her life. She then began to rise little by little and stated that she thought the subject could be closed. After all, it turns out she has an appointment for today, so she asked him to call her secretary. Suddenly, her future husband turned to her and said whether Her Majesty was in her right mind or not. Next, he and his brother put the girl back on the bed and covered her with a blanket. The victims noticed that she had literally just woken up a couple minutes ago, having nearly died, and now all she needed was rest. The girl remarked she was fine after all, and her brother also added that she'd better keep quiet and lie still. The heroine, in turn, added that the case is urgent, and for today he needs to solve. Her husband said that then he takes everything on himself, and the rest will personally report to her later. He also asked that she should just lie down for now. Her brother remarked with a smile on his face that Haven was indeed right, and he had become her spouse not to sit on his pants. And to his sister, he stated that she should be more careful before meals until he fished out that particular rat. The man remarked that it was just like that. If help was needed, just let her ask for it. In turn, the girl heard this thought that this was the only thing she was afraid of. After the brother declared that she should rest and they would leave the room. But suddenly, the sister turned to her brother and asked him to wait for a while. She also wondered once she opened her eyes, didn't he tell her not to make the same mistakes? And here she was, wondering what all that had already been said to. He looked at the girl in surprise and immediately ran up to her. Next, he hugged his little sister and wondered if her hearing was damaged because of her illness. He also sadly asked if he might need to call the doctor again. Hearing this, the protagonist thought whether she had misheard. Also told the guy that it is not necessary to do this, because it seems that she dreamed then in her sleep. He noticed that the girl did not keep silent if she had something hurts, and told him. The heroine said that she would do as he said, but the first thing to do is to catch the criminal, after stating that she was still alive, so everything was fine for now. The brother immediately and remarked that the wounds would sort it all out. Next, he tried to leave the room again and stated to his sister to rest. She stated that she would, and then lay down to sleep. At this very moment, thought that there must be a very great commotion in the palace. After that, a small amount of time passed, and the protagonist woke up. She woke up to Haven checking her temperature. The girl was still quite hot, and he stated that she still had a fever. But her interlocutor was the first to inquire about the meeting. In turn, the guy remarked to her that it seems that someone needs a cure for workaholism. The heroine noticed that the situation of the Seven Hills is still not stable. It was because of this that it was not yet time to be a lazy empress. Her spouse inquired if she really wanted to be lazy. The girl stated that of course she wants it, because she likes the idle life. The man touched her face and said that in that case, he would do his best to make her dream come true. He then pointed to her medicine and stated that the medicine was prepared by the court healer. He also noticed that it did not have a particularly pleasant taste, so he advised her to drink it all at once. The heroine drank it instantly, and the guy noticed that it was so bitter, and the one didn't even blush. Also further, he gave her a candy, and the girl stated that she was used to the bitter taste. And now she wanted to see the very report. Immediately, the man handed her a sheet of information. He stated that this information on the Brandel River was on the last page. The Empress began to peruse the documents. She stated that this river was actually quite shallow, but it often overflowed. The previous emperor's ignoring of this problem causes them to spend heavily on maintenance. The man noticed that the workers had asked for the project to be scaled down. The girl remarked that this would not be happening. The Duke went on to say that it's not about money at all, but people are asking how they can handle everything in a timely manner. He told them that there would be no shortage of labor, so they could start mapping out their work. Spouse inquired what made him say that. He inquired if she was not planning to send troops there on the pretext of building a dam. The protagonist thought she was really interested in building a dam on the Brandel River, and there are literally two reasons for that. Of course, the first reason is to clean up the river and to clean up the river, but it's also an opportunity to place their army between southern Delmoy and eastern Pegasus. She realized that one meeting was enough for Haven to realize that she wanted to strangle Hedildel and Alkis. The heroine immediately told the man that she was pleased to be dealing with an intelligent partner. He, smiling, remarked that he was very glad to hear that. There was a brief lull in the room after that. Next, the girl turned to Haven, and the latter asked what she wanted. The heroine remarked that when she was invited to participate in that tournament, was it the first time he had met Eddie? Her spouse remarked to her that it was. She inquired whether or not they had been in touch again since then. The Duke stated that there was no such thing, as she had told him not to meet him alone. The heroine remarked that the whole thing was rather strange, for it seemed that Eddie had been following him for a long time. The man wondered if he was really following him. The girl remarked that it was all so otherwise she couldn't explain why he had chosen him. Moore inquired about them, they just have similar tastes. Immediately stated that she really likes him, and also Eddie likes him too. The spouse remarked that he does not know whether to rejoice or shiver with fear at this news. The girl remarked that she says it nevertheless sincerely. But he added to her that it was also frightening, but he would take it all for granted. The Empress wondered if the man was saying he wasn't happy and if Eddie was the reason. But the man fucked off and remarked that he thinks her brother is very good for Her Majesty. But if truth be told, it is sometimes difficult for him to understand the reason why his affection for the girl is so strong. The heroine, smiling, remarked that he had always been such a child of eager love. The interlocutor asked to forgive Her Majesty, but in his opinion, he was brought up with excessive affection. After all, now he is like a bull that he is unable to decide anything on his own. After these words, the girl immediately thought that Edwin in his past life was not at all like this. Then, too, her brother, who had not seen the love of his parents, grew up on the hands of a rumor. He also had an eternally busy and inattentive sister. The girl clearly remembered only a few moments from her past life. For example, she remembered very well the day she became a countess. Then she was tired of hearing this or that statement, or the ridicule of the imperial family passed off as congratulations. All she could think of was to go back to her room as soon as possible and lie down on her bed. The very day she returned home, Edwin was sitting on the stairs with the stuffed rabbit she had played with as a child. When the boy saw his baby sister, he was overjoyed and immediately turned to her. But at the same time, it was late at night, and he stayed up, probably to congratulate the protagonist. But then the girl snapped at her little brother and asked why it was he who couldn't sleep, and further just went to her room. Then she hated Eddie for the fact that as the youngest family, he is free from any responsibility. The girl regretted that act until the day she died, but got a second chance that day. She hugged Eddie with all her might and thanked him sincerely. From then on, she tried to be nice and ended up growing into a great but bad boy. And that was something she was justifiably proud of. The Empress remarked to her consort that her brother was funny. She further stated that he should just try to get used to it, that's all. The man wondered if that was an order. Also remarked that he never would have thought she was that kind of person. The girl inquired with a smile, "What kind of person?" And he didn't notice that strange such a person. Smiling, he added that, in fact, even before Count Satan had visited him, he had wanted to meet her, though he didn't think at the time that their meeting would take place at that very tournament. Hearing this, the heroine was a bit shocked and thought, did he really want to see her, and then why? The spouse immediately stated that he was wondering who had done what he wanted to do before. The girl was shocked and wondered if Haven wanted the imperial throne. The girl realized that no matter how much she liked him, she couldn't let him near her if he wanted to take her place at that. All this because who but she knows what a man is capable of for the sake of power. The protagonist felt very strongly about this and thought that what she wanted was for him to say that he didn't want power. The future spouse smiled and said that he only wanted to get rid of the former emperor, and he was not interested in the throne itself. At one time, he had decided to get rid of the emperor before fighting Gripton, but the emperor had changed. He noticed that the Seven Hills Empire had completely changed in the few months of the new administration. That was why he wanted to see which outstanding person was able to accomplish all of this. Hearing all these words, the Empress noticed that he must be disappointed, but the man immediately told her that it was all wrong. After all, it is difficult for him to imagine a person more deserving of this throne than her. The heroine immediately exhaled and thanked the god. After all, she had already considered leaving the throne and starting to fight against her own husband. He remarked with a smile that she had nothing to worry about in doing so. His wife smiled in response and said that she believed him. He placed his hand beside her and inquired as to why she trusted him so easily. He further added that he had entered the palace and soon she would fall from the poison. Now he wondered how she could trust him after that. Also inquired if she knew what kind of medicine he had just given her. Asked why she quietly drank it, unbeknownst to her at that. The heroine remarked that she drank it because she knew it was the right antidote and wondered if she was wrong. The interlocutor remarked that it was all true, and it was the antidote. The girl then stated at the same time why he was telling her all this. Also remarked that she trusts Haven after all. The protagonist thought she felt guilty that he was reacting this way. At the same time, thought that, honestly, it's not that she doesn't trust the man, it's that she trusts Eddie's choices. After all, her brother couldn't allow any man capable of harming her to be around him. Suddenly, the consort turned to Her Majesty. The latter inquired as to what he wanted. He noticed that he also liked the girl. The heroine immediately thought that he had just told her. The Empress, embarrassed, wondered if that was a good thing or if she was misunderstanding. The man immediately leaned very close to her and declared that he would definitely steal her heart in the future. At this very moment, he tried to kiss her, but the girl pushed him away with her hand and declared that he should wait a little longer. After all, she doesn't like people who steal something from her. Next, she asked him to say something different. Her husband kissed her hand and said that he would do anything to make her love him.